Hi, I'm Professor Joan Butler, and I'm looking forward to facilitating your learning about drug development this semester in CRA 6202. This short talk is to review some of the major themes that you've explored in week one. For this first week, you're examining the history of FDA and some of the paradigms of drug development, and also how clinical research evolved from medical observation to well-controlled trials evaluating benefit, which is efficacy, and risk, safety. It's useful to look at the historical beginnings to have a better understanding of how FDA's authority and clinical research and drug development practices have evolved to the present day. At best, it's hoped that by studying history, that the travesties of history do not repeat themselves. But that's not always the case, even in clinical research. When I think about how far we've come, I'm amazed in terms of the number of new products that have been developed and the FDA's enforcement and regulations in terms of assuring that drugs are safe and effective. And to think that only in 1932 that the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act was passed. And now, here we are looking at newer paradigms of translational medicine and personalized medicine. You've read the history of the formation of FDA starting in the early 1900s, with the American Medical Association playing a key role. It's interesting and, of course, not surprising that healthcare providers helped to truly lead the way, and in part the government followed in this case. In these early years, the focus was predominantly on safety and assuring that the drug product was pure. It was not until the early 1960s when FDA was given authority to regulate clinical trials and the efficacy evaluations of new products also became a major focus. As a result of conducting clinical trials actually during World War II and trying to develop drugs such as antibiotics for the battlefield, that practices such as requiring double-blind trials to ensure no bias, using a placebo control to evaluate whether the new drug was really effective and working and did not result also in serious side effects, so that by including a placebo, a cause and effect could really be discerned. And also requiring inclusion-exclusion criteria in all clinical trials. All of this was the result of these experiments occurring during World War II. As I read this week's readings, I was struck by the determination of many healthcare providers to provide the safest treatments to patients in the early part of the 20th century, when there were no regulations in place to protect patients, and how doctors in World War II figured out what controls would benefit the clinical trial process and allow new therapies to be evaluated in patients through medical observation and testing, and coming up with ways to better measure the performance of a new treatment in terms of effectiveness and potential serious and non-serious safety effects in patients. Another major event were the Kefauver hearings in the late 1950s, which focused on the lack of consistent quality of pharmaceutical companies in the manufacture of their drugs, and also the large profits that the pharmaceutical companies were earning. These are actually still relevant topics that are in the news today, and also there are still congressional hearings today about unsafe drugs in the marketplace, and also FDA's actions in approving drugs too slowly or too quickly, and also the pharmaceutical industry's policies in terms of their profitability and also their pricing. In addition, we learned this week, and we saw how AIDS advocacy groups fighting for any drug remedy that might help AIDS patients suffer less or possibly even result in these patients coming into remission and becoming stable were such a major force in the 1980s that resulted in the accelerated approval regulations for drugs treating serious and life-threatening diseases for which there were no existing therapies that FDA actually put into place as a result of these major efforts. This was the first time that patient advocacy had a direct impact on changing FDA's thinking. These regulations allow the sponsor to sell certain drugs that meet criteria based on initial positive clinical data while conducting additional studies. And we've seen it work well now. Most recently, one example is Avastin, which was approved for treating aggressive breast cancer. And then when additional clinical trials were done, it was found that actually Avastin did not promote additional survival and caused some serious side effects that increased mortality. So the Avastin is no longer marketed for that indication. So it demonstrated that these regulations do work and FDA does follow through with enforcement. Now FDA welcomes patient advocacy groups at all of their FDA advisory committee meetings. Also, patient advocacy groups are having a bigger role both in drug development in pharmaceutical industry and also in the FDA review processes. Therefore, reviewing FDA history does provide a window in which to better understand some of the initiatives, activities, and remaining problems in today's clinical research industry, and also helps to identify some constant themes. One of which is the cornerstone of drug development continues to be benefit-risk assessment. That is, does a treatment provide greater benefit to the patient compared to the risks? That is, does the patient's health improve significantly and greater than the side effects that the patient is experiencing as a result of the drug? FDA's history is a good lesson to see how our country started, where we are today, and our pathway forward. Thanks a lot.